Do you believe a life can be sold to save a name? Welcome, dear readers, to the magnificent, glittering, and often merciless world of the Victorian aristocracy. Today, we invite you behind the closed doors of Ravenscroft Hall, where duty is a sharper blade than desire, and the most solemn vows are utterly devoid of love. Stay with us for this epic tale of sacrifice, betrayal, and the dangerous, quiet pull of forbidden passion. If you love stories where dignity triumphs over despair and where the hero is utterly reformed by the heroine's grace, make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss a single chapter of Eleanor and Sebastian's journey. Part 1: The Bargain of Sacrifice. The ledger was the truest villain of Eleanor Whitcombe's life. It lay open on the mahogany desk, a monstrous record of her father's misfortunes and misjudgments, each line item a fresh cut of humiliation. She did not need to read the numbers. The figure of the debt was etched into her mind, vast enough to swallow their ancestral home, their very name, and, worst of all, the future of her 15-year-old sister, Clara. At 28, Eleanor possessed a quiet, unassuming beauty, one that favored the candlelight of a parlor over the harsh glare of day. Her strength was not in grand gestures, but in her extraordinary capacity for endurance, a trait born not of privilege, but of necessity. She had watched her father, once so proud and vibrant, shrink beneath the crushing weight of his financial ruin, his once robust frame now frail and constantly racked by a cough. The solution, presented by her father's weary solicitor, Mr. Davies, was simple, brutal, and final: Lord Sebastian Ravenscroft. "He is seeking a wife of suitable lineage, Miss Whitcombe," Mr. Davies had explained in a low, apologetic tone. "No sentiment, purely business, a family with an old name to balance his new money. He requires an unblemished reputation, a stable presence. In exchange, he will settle all of Lord Whitcombe's debts, every last shilling." It was not a marriage proposal. It was a transaction. Eleanor had lifted her chin, her gaze meeting the solicitor's without flinching. Her family's survival was a burden, a sacred, crushing weight. It left no room for the fanciful notions of love and courtship she had once harbored. "When is the wedding, Mr. Davies?" she had asked, the single word sealing her fate. Her choice was not for herself, it was for her father's peace and Clara's prospects. It was the only dignity left to them. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, a swift, hushed affair designed for discretion. There was no grand society spectacle, no endless receiving line, no joyful clamor. It was an arrangement designed to be efficient, like the signing of a crucial treaty. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, its ivory satin yellowed with age, the lace bodice feeling alien and stiff against her skin. She had pinned a single, perfectly white gardenia into her hair, a bloom that felt as cold and fragile as her own heart. The groom, Lord Sebastian Ravenscroft, stood waiting at the altar of the small, silent chapel. He was a presence that instantly commanded a room, even empty. Tall and lean, dressed in impeccably tailored black, he possessed a darkly handsome severity, a perpetual slight furrow to his brow that suggested the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He was in his early 30s, a brooding nobleman whose wealth was as immense as his reputation for aloofness. As she was led down the aisle by her frail father, Eleanor dared a glance up at her future husband. Sebastian's eyes, a deep, restless gray, met hers. They held no warmth, no anticipation, no spark of admiration, only a remote, penetrating assessment. He looked at her as one might examine a necessary expensive purchase, serviceable and appropriate, but utterly devoid of passion. The vows were spoken in clipped, formal tones. Sebastian's voice was a low, resonant baritone, steady and unwavering as he promised to love and cherish her. The words were a bitter mockery given the circumstances, and Eleanor felt a knot tighten in her chest. She repeated her own vows with a quiet, resolute clarity, fixing her gaze not on him, but on a stained glass image of an unyielding saint above the altar. When he placed the gold band on her finger, his skin was cool to the touch. The ring was heavy, beautiful, and felt instantly like a shackle. At the small, painfully brief reception, only Sebastian's stern mother, Lady Ravenscroft, a woman whose gaze could freeze the blood, was present alongside Eleanor's small contingent. Lady Ravenscroft surveyed Eleanor with an air of critical disapproval. "Now, Eleanor," she stated, her voice sharp as glass, "you are a Ravenscroft. We expect perfection. Do not disappoint my son or this family." Eleanor simply nodded, her hand gripping her sister Clara's arm. The transaction was complete. Her family was safe. Her life, as she knew it, was over. The journey to Ravenscroft Hall was conducted in near silence. The carriage was luxurious, lined in deep green velvet, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Eleanor sat stiffly opposite Sebastian. She had rehearsed a dozen opening phrases in her mind, polite inquiries about his estate, a meek expression of thanks, but the words died on her tongue under the weight of his reserved demeanor. He finally spoke as the carriage turned up the long drive. "Eleanor," he said, the sound of her name on his lips formal and unfamiliar. "I must be clear. This is a marriage of convenience, nothing more." She looked out the window at the looming, magnificent profile of the hall, a fortress of ancient stone and responsibility. "I understand, Lord Ravenscroft. I have made my sacrifice with open eyes. Then you understand the terms. You will have my name, my protection, and whatever monetary support you require to maintain your position as my wife. In return, I require a blameless household, a faultless hostess, and an heir." He paused, and his gray eyes finally flickered to hers, a brief, sharp warning. "Beyond that, I ask for discretion. You will not pry into my affairs, nor will you demand of me what I cannot give." She swallowed hard. "I understand, Lord Ravenscroft. My only demand was the safety of my family. That debt is paid. The rest is simply duty." He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Good. Then we shall manage this arrangement effectively." The wedding night was an excruciating blend of formality and humiliation. Ravenscroft Hall was vast, silent, and cold. Their shared suite was palatial, the bed a massive, canopied structure that looked wide enough to accommodate 3 people comfortably and separate them entirely. Eleanor's new maid had helped her out of the cumbersome wedding gown and into a simple, fine linen nightdress. Her hands were shaking slightly. She sat by the vanity, pretending to brush her hair, listening to the agonizing silence. Sebastian finally entered the room. He had changed into a dressing gown of dark silk. He looked tired, perhaps even weary, but his face was a mask of careful neutrality. He walked to a cabinet and poured himself a glass of brandy. He did not offer her one. "Eleanor," he said, his back still to her, "I am your husband, and a Ravenscroft requires an heir." He turned then, his posture unyielding. "I will not insult you with pretense. There is no sentiment, no warmth in this act, only necessity. Forgive me if I treat this as the duty it is." Her stomach clenched, but she rose, determined to meet this final, crushing term with the dignity she had promised herself. She was a sacrifice on the altar of her family's solvency. She would not cry. She would not beg. "There is nothing to forgive, my lord," she managed, her voice a thin, steady thread. "I understand duty." The ensuing intimacy was cold, efficient, and painfully swift, exactly as he had promised. There was no kiss, no tenderness, no flicker of acknowledgement beyond the mechanical execution of a necessity. His touch was firm, his presence overwhelming, but his mind was clearly elsewhere, remote, detached. Eleanor endured it, her hands fisted in the fine linen sheets, her gaze fixed on the canopy above, willing the act to end. When he was done, he withdrew instantly, without a word, a kiss, or even a glance. He stood up, went to the small dressing room, and returned a moment later, having changed his attire back into his silk dressing gown. He moved to the separate daybed near the fireplace, arranging the pillows with fastidious care. "I find I sleep better here," he said, his voice flat. "Good night, Eleanor." It was the ultimate rejection, a courtesy offered out of distance, not respect. Eleanor lay in the cavernous, cold main bed, her body aching, her heart hollowed out. She was his wife, but she was utterly, profoundly alone. The hall was silent, wrapped in the deep, ancient quiet of the countryside night. Eleanor lay awake for what felt like hours, listening to the heavy, steady ticking of the clock, the only witness to her humiliation. She finally drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep, her mind replaying the day's brutal formalities. Then a sound, faint and low, pulled her back to the precipice of wakefulness. It was a murmur, a whisper carried across the vast expanse of the room from where Sebastian lay on the daybed. He was speaking in his sleep, his voice deep and tormented. "No, Isabella, don't leave." A pause, a low groan of unmistakable pain. "Please, Isabella." The name hung in the air like a phantom, a beautiful, cruel specter. Isabella. It was the name of the woman his heart truly belonged to. Not a casual mistress, but a woman he spoke of in his sleep with a heartbroken, desperate longing that had been utterly absent from his interaction with his own wife. The knowledge was a sharp, stabbing pain, instantly more searing than the cold transaction of their marriage. Eleanor had married Sebastian to save her family, a painful sacrifice she had accepted. But in the dark, she realized her bargain was not just for a loveless marriage. It was for a marriage built upon the shattered remnant of her husband's first, truest love. She was not a wife. She was a stand-in, a convenient placeholder in the life of a man whose heart was already irrevocably claimed by Lady Isabella Harrow. Tears, which she had successfully fought off all day, finally tracked a hot, silent path into the lace of her pillow. The first day of her new life had ended. The transaction was complete, and the agony of the next phase was only just beginning. Part 2. A House of Strangers. The first month of Eleanor's married life at Ravenscroft Hall was an exercise in isolation. The hall was less a home and more a fortress, magnificent, vast, and utterly indifferent to her presence. The architecture of their marriage mirrored the house itself, grandly functional, yet cold and largely uninhabited. Lord Sebastian Ravenscroft maintained a schedule of meticulous avoidance. He was often away in London on business concerning his vast properties or closeted in his private library, poring over estate ledgers. When they were in the same room, at dinner, or during the strained hour of tea with Lady Ravenscroft, he treated Eleanor with unwavering formal courtesy, a perfect host to a distinguished but ultimately uninteresting guest. His attentiveness was a shield, his courtesy a barrier. He never lingered, never inquired about her feelings, and, crucially, never again shared her bed, maintaining his chosen post on the daybed near the fire. Eleanor, or Nora as she had once been called, found herself wandering the echoing corridors, a ghost in her own life. She supervised the household, managed the servants with a gentle firmness, and fulfilled every expectation of a Lady Ravenscroft under the stern, hawk-like supervision of Sebastian's mother. The Dowager Lady Ravenscroft, a woman carved from granite and tradition, offered neither comfort nor praise, only a silent, ongoing appraisal. "Your stitching is adequate, Eleanor," she might say, her voice devoid of inflection, "but the menu for the dinner party requires more salmon. A Ravenscroft table must never look wanting." Eleanor performed her duties flawlessly. She saw to the comfort of her father, now safely retired to a small cottage on the estate, his debts dissolved. She corresponded cheerfully with Clara, ensuring her sister was well situated at her boarding school, her future secured. The sacrifice had been made, and the results were manifest. But the hollow ache in her chest persisted. She was the mistress of a great house, yet possessed no claim to the master's heart. The season was in full swing, and society had quickly absorbed the news of Lord Ravenscroft's sudden, quiet marriage. And society, ever hungry for drama, immediately began to dissect it. Eleanor learned the full scope of Sebastian's prior attachment not from him, but from the relentless tittle-tattle of London drawing rooms. She and Sebastian made their required appearances, a perfectly composed couple. She, reserved and elegant, he, severe and protective. But everywhere they went, Eleanor could feel the curious knowing stares. The whispers followed her like an unwanted shadow. "Of course, she is very suitable, perfectly bred, but he was quite broken after Isabella. The Marquess of Harrow won the prize, but everyone knows Lord Ravenscroft won the heart. They say he only married the Whitcombe girl to settle down and forget. A cure, not a companion." The object of all this speculation, Lady Isabella Harrow was, Eleanor soon discovered, Sebastian's antithesis, bright, glittering, and utterly magnetic. Isabella had chosen wealth and title, marrying the powerful Marquess, but she had never relinquished her hold on Sebastian's emotions. Their story was the stuff of romantic legend, a devastating, passionate courtship that ended in betrayal when Isabella chose a more prestigious match. Sebastian, wounded but too proud to show it, had withdrawn, only to reappear months later with a respectable, if unexciting, wife in tow. The rumors solidified Eleanor's understanding of her role. She was the balm, the convenient replacement, the unglamorous solution to a painful, passionate history. The inevitable confrontation occurred at the Duchess of Sutherland's annual Midsummer Ball, the event of the season. Eleanor was dressed in a gown of sapphire velvet, chosen by Lady Ravenscroft for its suitable sobriety. She stood beside Sebastian near the grand staircase, fulfilling her duty as his silent, beautiful accessory. Then the murmuring shifted. The room seemed to hold its breath, and Lady Isabella Harrow made her entrance. She was breathtaking, Clad in scandalous emerald silk, every diamond on her neck seemed to capture and scatter the light. She moved with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her laughter bright and knowing. Eleanor watched Sebastian watch her. It was not a quick glance or a fleeting acknowledgement of a former acquaintance. It was a gaze that transcended the crowded ballroom, a long, searching, agonizing look that spoke volumes of unresolved passion. The aloof Lord Ravenscroft's mask slipped just for a moment, and Eleanor saw it, the longing. It was a visceral, painful expression of possession and regret. Sebastian's entire body seemed to lean toward Isabella, a silent, powerful confession that every soul in the room witnessed. Isabella, in turn, offered a smile, a slow, triumphant curve of her lips that was reserved only for Sebastian. Her eyes were mocking when they finally flickered to Eleanor, a look that said, "You may have his ring and his name, but I still have his heart." The sheer, cold humiliation struck Eleanor with a physical force. It wasn't just that he loved another woman, it was that he broadcasted that love, however unintentionally, for all of London to observe. She felt her cheeks flush crimson, her hands tightening until her knuckles were white. The whispers around them intensified, a collective sigh of pity and scandal directed straight at the new Lady Ravenscroft. Sebastian, finally retrieving his composure, turned to Eleanor, his expression instantly reverting to the cool mask. "Are you well, Eleanor? You look pale." His concern, detached and perfunctory, only made it worse. He saw her pallor, but he did not see the cause, the gaping wound he had just inflicted on her pride. "Perfectly well, my lord," she managed, her voice dangerously steady. "The room is merely warm." She asked him to retrieve a glass of lemonade, a simple command that gave her a moment of reprieve. As he moved away, she stood completely still, forcing herself to breathe in time with the music, regaining her composure piece by painstaking piece. Later that night, back in the silent, separate spheres of their opulent suite, Eleanor undressed herself with deliberate movements. She had dismissed her maid quickly, needing the solitude to face the bitter reality. She stood before the full-length mirror, gazing at the reflection of the woman Sebastian had married, a woman of suitable lineage, sound character, and an empty heart. The day of the wedding, she had accepted a loveless marriage. Tonight, she accepted the added burden of a humiliating one. She thought of the raw, desperate pain she had felt at the ball, the stultifying shame of being the discarded prop in Sebastian and Isabella's drama. She recalled Isabella's triumphant smirk and Sebastian's tormented gaze fixed across the room. That raw pain crystallized into an unshakable resolve. She was a Lady Ravenscroft now. She had sold her life for her family's name, and she would not allow that sacrifice to be cheapened by despair or public pity. If Sebastian was too blind, too loyal to his heartbreak, to offer her the respect due to his wife, then she would provide that respect for herself. She walked to the massive main bed and climbed in, not with the trepidation of the wedding night, but with an air of determined ownership. She lay down, her back straight, gazing into the darkness of the canopy, not at the ceiling. She spoke the vow silently, a prayer directed only to herself. I will not be a casualty in their unfinished history. If she was to endure this loveless marriage, she would do so with dignity. She would be the perfect Lady Ravenscroft, an impeccable wife and hostess, immune to the pity of society and the indifference of her husband. She would not cry for his heart. She would not beg for his affection. She would not let the specter of Isabella Harrow diminish her worth. She would build her own fortress of pride and resilience, and from behind its walls she would live her life. She would be Lady Ravenscroft, and she would never, ever let them see her break. Part 3. Sparks in the Shadows. Eleanor's quiet resolve was immediately tested. The Duchess's ball had provided society with enough fuel to start a genuine fire, and Lady Isabella Harrow, it seemed, was only too eager to stoke the flames. The crisis began with a series of thinly veiled rumors concerning Sebastian's financial holdings, specifically a struggling agricultural venture in the north. The whispers suggested Sebastian was overextended, the profit margins were collapsing, and his seemingly limitless wealth was, in fact, built on a shaky foundation of debt and speculation. The rumors, which carried the distinct scent of having been planted by someone with precise, intimate knowledge of Sebastian's business, spread rapidly. If true, the resulting scandal would not only damage Sebastian's standing, but also threaten the stability Eleanor's sacrifice had bought her family. Sebastian, immersed in his own affairs and perhaps distracted by the renewed proximity of Isabella, was slow to react. He dismissed the rumors as petty jealousy, a minor annoyance. "Let them talk, Eleanor," he said curtly one morning at breakfast without looking up from his paper. "They always do. My accounts are solid." But Eleanor knew the corrosive power of a social scandal. Her own family's ruin had begun with whispers. If the Ravenscroft name was tarnished, her father and sister would be dragged down again. This was more than a matter of social standing. It was a threat to the foundation of her marriage. Taking the initiative, Eleanor spent 3 days in the hall's vast, musty library, poring over Sebastian's publicly filed reports and old correspondence. She sought out his solicitor, Mr. Davies, the same man who had brokered her marriage, and pressed him for details, employing a relentless, quiet logic that surprised the seasoned lawyer. She discovered the truth. The northern venture was indeed struggling, but the true liability lay not in the land itself, but in the poor management and outright embezzlement by a distant overseer. The rumors were half-truths, poisoned with specific, damaging details. At the next social engagement, a small, intimate luncheon where the whispers were loudest, Eleanor acted. With a calmness that belied her terror, she directed the conversation toward agricultural reform. She spoke not of Sebastian's wealth, but of his integrity. She detailed, with surprising knowledge, the specific inefficiency of the overseer in question, and announced Sebastian's swift intention to replace him with a noted expert. "Lord Ravenscroft is not merely rich, Mrs. Beaumont," Eleanor said, her voice clear and precise as crystal. "He is prudent. He never allows mismanagement to linger, nor does he suffer the character of his employees to remain in question. He is handling the situation with efficiency, not panic." Her quiet, informed defense successfully shifted the narrative. The rumors deflated. People had expected a panicked wife or an arrogant husband. They found instead a steady, authoritative mistress of the house. The effect on Sebastian was immediate and profound. He returned from a short trip to London expecting to find a house in turmoil, but found instead a calm, corrected social climate. When Mr. Davies visited the hall, he spoke of Eleanor's intervention with grudging respect. "She headed off a serious issue, my lord," the solicitor confessed. "She was precise and very persuasive. She saved you a great deal of embarrassment and, frankly, several £1,000s in panicked investor withdrawals." Sebastian sought out Eleanor in the library, where she was reorganizing a collection of neglected botanical drawings. He stood in the doorway, watching her for a long moment. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice low. Eleanor turned, holding a heavy volume. "I am your wife, Lord Ravenscroft. A scandal against your house is a scandal against mine." "It was my responsibility," he said, a note of self-reproach in his tone. "You were otherwise occupied," she replied simply, choosing not to press the point. "I performed my duty as you requested." Sebastian walked closer, resting his hand on the mahogany table. He finally looked at her, truly saw her, perhaps for the first time since their wedding. He saw the resilience in her eyes, the quiet strength that had been dismissed as mere meekness. "You displayed remarkable foresight and courage, Eleanor," he conceded. "I thank you." It was the most genuine compliment she had ever received from him, and the unexpected warmth of it caused a flicker of hope, a tiny, dangerous spark to ignite within her. He was starting to notice her, not as a transaction, but as an ally. The subtle shift in their dynamic manifested a few days later during a ride across the estate. Eleanor was an adequate rider, but her mare, a spirited, restless creature, was a constant challenge. Sebastian had reluctantly accompanied her, maintaining a polite distance. They were traversing a wooded bridle path when the mare shied violently at a low-flying game bird. Eleanor lost her balance and was thrown hard from the saddle, landing awkwardly on the damp earth beneath an oak tree. The air rushed from her lungs. Sebastian reacted with startling speed. He dismounted instantly, abandoning his own horse, and rushed to her side. The mask of aloofness was gone, replaced by an expression of genuine, sharp concern. "Eleanor?" He knelt beside her, his hands hovering, then resting firmly on her shoulders. "Are you hurt? Where is the pain?" she gasped, trying to catch her breath. "My ankle, I think. And the wind." is quite gone. He gently helped her sit up, his strong arm supporting her back. His face was only inches from hers. She could see the dark texture of his pupils, the faint flush of exertion on his high cheekbones, and the anxiety etched around his mouth. For the first time, he was not the distant nobleman. He was simply a man, human and alarmed. He carefully ran his hands down her legs, his touch gentle yet firm, until he reached her ankle. "It is swelling," he muttered, his fingers pressing lightly. The physical closeness was intoxicating, shattering the polite distance of months. She felt the heat radiating from his body, smelled the clean, sharp scent of leather and earth, and realized the full, dangerous force of his presence. "I am fine, my lord," she whispered, her voice husky. "You are not fine," he contradicted, his gaze locking with hers. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her inner ankle, and a shock, sudden and undeniable, jolted through her. Her breath hitched again, but this time it wasn't from the fall. He felt it too. The air between them thickened, charged with a sudden, frightening intensity. His eyes darkened, moving from her ankle to her face, resting on her parted lips. The silence stretched, potent with possibility. Their closeness was sparking something neither of them had dared to name, an attraction born of shared risk and unexpected tenderness. But just as his head dipped infinitesimally, the moment fractured. He straightened abruptly, drawing back, his expression swiftly shuddering once more into careful neutrality. "I will carry you back to the hall," he said, his voice clipped and rough. "We must have the physician look at that immediately." He lifted her easily into his arms. The transit back was agonizing, her body pressed against the hard planes of his chest, the scent and heat of him overriding the pain in her ankle. The charged moment was over, but the spark it had ignited lingered, a dangerous warmth beneath the cold facade of their duty. Eleanor closed her eyes, clutching his shoulder, the hope in her heart now beating like a frantic, caged bird. Confined to her rooms for a week with a sprained ankle, Eleanor's hopes grew unchecked. Sebastian was solicitous, visiting her daily, bringing books and inquiring after her comfort. He seemed subtly changed, less remote, less burdened. She dared to believe that their proximity, the crisis, the touch, it had all served to finally break through the barrier of his reserve. On the seventh night, unable to sleep, Eleanor limped to the window overlooking the hall's expansive gardens. She was watching the moon, bright and full, when she saw a figure emerge from the shadowy line of the oak grove. It was Sebastian. He was waiting by a stone bench, cloaked in the shadows. He didn't wait long. A minute later, a second figure appeared, moving with a graceful, fluid certainty Eleanor recognized instantly. Lady Isabella Harrow. Eleanor stood frozen, watching the silent drama unfold beneath the treacherous light of the moon. Isabella stepped closer to Sebastian, and they embraced, a brief, close clasp that was too intimate for mere friendship. They spoke for several minutes, their figures pressed close in conversation, their faces turned toward each other, utterly absorbed. The scene was a devastating echo of Sebastian's sleeping whisper. The hope that had blossomed in Eleanor's heart, nurtured by his gratitude, his touch, and his concern, was instantly, brutally withered. His kindness had been nothing more than a temporary lapse of duty, an accidental surge of adrenaline. His heart, his loyalty, and his stolen moments of passion still belonged elsewhere. He was grateful for his wife, perhaps even attracted to her, but he was bound to Isabella. Eleanor stumbled back from the window, the pain in her heart now far eclipsing the ache in her ankle. She had defended his name, endured his rejection, and glimpsed a moment of true connection, only to witness the painful truth. She was merely the Lady of Ravenscroft, while Isabella remained the lady of his soul. The spark has been struck. Sebastian, the impenetrable Lord Ravenscroft, saw the quiet strength of his wife and felt the sudden, alarming heat of her presence. The walls of his pride fractured for one charged moment. But the sight of him meeting Lady Isabella under the cloak of moonlight has delivered a cruel, cold shock to Eleanor. She has endured his distance. She has survived the humiliation of society's whispers. But can she endure the lie of his kindness while his heart remains hopelessly tethered to his past? This brings to a close part one of our story. The game of dignified endurance is over. In the next part, Eleanor must choose between silence and confrontation, and Sebastian will be forced to face the painful, ugly truth he has hidden for years. What will happen when Eleanor demands honesty? And what cruel words will Sebastian utter to protect his wounded pride? Find out in the next part.